Well, we are recording. Awkward moment of authentic silence. Ha! Can the AI repeat that? I've heard several artists and concerned people from my generation and beyond opine about artificial intelligence, and I felt like I had something to say today. I just came off of a very, very tough time dealing with some medical issues for my mother up in the Ozarks. To tell you the truth, I can't tell if they were trying to save her or whether they were trying to kill her. We all know how the algorithm or how the cover story or narrative would be around that. But all things said, when you look certain situations in the moment and you really care about someone, you learn or develop an opinion about how the system is working with you, or potentially assuming that you're in a certain condition without really connecting with you. The numbers, the blood tests, the heartbeats, the blood pressure, the urine samples, the statistics can challenge the standard diagnosis. And my mother's alive today, I believe, because we didn't let the system treat her. We really fought, and it took going through 4 different systems up in the Ozarks and interfacing with, in all, about 7 different doctors to get to the bottom of a misdiagnosed, or actually a mismanaged set of pharmaceutical prescriptions for a woman who's really actually quite healthy. So how does that relate to AI? Well, I listen to artists, and I've got, 3 children of my own who are all in their own way, extremely creative and artistic and expressive. One who happens to be a fairly, actually, I think a quite well-respected artist in her own right, in her 30s. So I've got some views on creativity. And of course, they spawned from my childhood. I was a writer early on, and I met with some resistance over what I wanted to say, if you could imagine that. Yeah, thanks for bearing with me there. That was quite a flashback. But the algorithm cannot trap and repeat your creativity when it's authentic. And you can even use the algorithm to your advantage. In the 1990s, after I had done a lot of computer modeling in the oil and gas industry and really kind of learned the patterns of the industry, the one thing that was really standing out for me is that I was not happy doing that. And in spite of, how much money they may have thrown at me, I never conformed. And that really irritated some of my bosses. In fact, that led me into some pretty interesting exits from Mobil Oil and from some other executive suites and boardrooms over the years. But what happened was, whenever I really just I let myself go and was trying to pursue film acting in Dallas, Texas back in like 1994, 95, and quit a job and left the executive world. And it's interesting what happened. Immediately, like within 2 weeks, I was out doing 2 films almost immediately. And, on top of that, I was putting out some feelers to do some consulting work, because I mean, Texas and Dallas, were not like, big hubs for actors. And I had 3 kids and a wife that I was supporting there. And it was necessary for me to try to find a way to make ends meet. So I put some feelers out, and what do you know? I get a call immediately to go and basically teach Western styled management thinking and engineering practices using software all over the world. And I ended up doing this for some other big oil companies and gas companies and some geothermal companies, as well as some service companies like Halliburton and Schlumberger. But so yeah, I've worked for Mobil and Exxon and Chevron and the whole slew of independents and service companies over the years. But what happened was I learned that as the world was being explored for oil and gas, they were finding huge deposits in some what they called then third world countries. They call them developing countries now. And they did these deals with their countries, so to speak, with the politicians to train the natives in South America, Indonesia, Malaysia, parts of Europe. And I didn't work in China or Russia or Australia, but most of the other parts of the world, including South America and Central America, I have quite a bit of experience. So I went in there and was fascinated with the people. I was bored with what I was doing, for oil and gas, but I was excited about connecting to people. And how does this have to do with artificial intelligence? Well, I'm getting to it because what I was good at was picking up on patterns with human beings, and also patterns with some of the best, engineers and scientists in the world, and also with some of the best computer modelers in the world, because, most of these companies not only had to master the earth sciences, they also had to master the ability to but to actually manage their risk, into the future. If you can imagine, you spend a lot of your whole fortune, digging a hole in your backyard to bring up some mineral or oil, and then the market changes, and suddenly that's worth absolutely nothing. You've wasted your whole, however much time you put into it, but everything you may have invested is gone. How can you live like that? Well, it takes someone with PTSD, some deep wounds like me. And of course, there was a lot of people around me that were smart and greedy, so it made for an interesting mix of people. But my point here is that I went around the world and found it fascinating to deal with these different cultures. And I think I noticed some huge differences between the segments of the world population that I worked with in different geographies. And it's not quite as simple as delivering a quick message on YouTube to delineate the differences between working in Caracas, Venezuela for several years sporadically versus working in the Middle East or Malaysia or Europe or some other places in Central America. But each culture had their own way of viewing situations. And, I found that to be totally fascinating. And I got so much out of that period of my life in the 90s. So I made a few films, in concert with doing all of that work, and continued to study acting and to try to hone my creativity. And the interesting thing is that at one point, when I really did leave the oil business, or actually they threw me out of Kingwood, Texas, they threw me out of Houston. Partners totally, turned their back on me whenever the price of oil fell from around $100 to, down into the 30s and 40s. And I said, I've had enough of this. And, I spent the last 8 years virtually running on fumes, earning no money, and scraping to get by after losing. I think I threw everything I had trying to defend myself with a few lawyers and so forth, and really found that the whole system was, um, counter to my essence and what I was really, really, trying to bring forth in myself. What many of us might call our quest or my calling. And so looking back at the time that I spent in the 90s, I was using computers to try to guide people in their own, lifestyles and how they were thinking, to really kind of westernize or, make them think like a U.S. Oil man, so to speak. And many of them had actually been trained and educated. I was usually dealing with fairly elite people inside of these different developing countries. Some of them have been trained at Oxford and, Ivy League schools in the U.S. Far more fancy education than I had. But the differentiator was I was in the room, trying to really help them and nurture them to do their best. And I took a lot of pride in that, and I walked away with some great experiences and met some very, very fascinating circumstances. And of course, I did run into some very very wonderful people that I had some really great relationships with. But AI, it sounds like it's and I've worked with it a bunch. I mean, I still can't ask AI to go, you know, do something for the best thing for my kids or for a relationship, or ask that to, tell me the best place to drill an oil well, or which is the best bank to work with. I don't think it has the patterns to do that, maybe yet. But I think that, you know, in my own way, in the 2000s, I walked in to a situation with a financial firm and took a group of 5 people that were kind of mediocre with computers, and I saw the opportunity to enhance their productivity by automating a bunch of their work processes that I had observed. And it increased their productivity tenfold. So, in my own way in the 2000s, I was able to scale up as management bankers or management consultants or investment bankers would say. I was able to scale up without adding manpower. And we may have spent a little more on computers. And of course, I did have a lot of power and control over the operation because I was writing the algorithms to reach the scale transactions that we were trying to be able to execute. And I think I can look back and say, I eventually, ended up needing to take those 5 people and, ramped up the organization into about, probably about 100 that reported to me, and, was able to, really amplify their bandwidth and productivity. I'm talking about, petroleum engineers, geologists, and, some high math, technicians that were, um, excellent with computer modeling, as well as using an IT staff that was leading edge. So that was fascinating to me, but the human dynamic was even always, more fascinating. And as I've watched this artificial intelligence grow, I'm hearing a lot of artists and people that are really um, upset and scared about how AI is going to impact the world. And yeah, I do think that it is going to make, those that are able to use it um, and use it well, it's going to give them an edge, an edge over a person that only knows how to use a shovel, or is maybe just a good-looking person with, contacts, because now AI is getting good enough that it can make a film. It can take photos and a storyline that's loosely, thrown together and weave it all together into a way that looks like I mean, you give it the data set that Netflix has, or HBO, or, who knows, who else has Facebook and YouTube and Amazon. They all know our emotional makeups and our preferences, and how to get into our pocketbook and into our minds and influence us. So that is kind of scary and freaky. But for those of us who have really done the work and have mastered some of the things that have been obscured from the algorithm, there's power. There is power there, because the algorithm can't repeat that. And I don't even know if it's built to even put that into its data sets, because the algorithm is looking to what's popular. And nature always wins. Nature will help us survive as a humanity, and mankind will maintain its uniqueness. And there may be several um, phases of, I hate to use the word mutation, but we could see some dramatic changes in the way that we operate in physically and relationally, as well as how our capitalism is going to be impacted by the fact that these patterns can just be kind of hijacked to do the things that we have normally been doing. So as an individual, how does that give me power? Well, it gives me power if I'm able to use that and look at it honestly, and look at the feedback that it's giving me. Look at, if I can see the pattern that it's showing me about how I operate. Maybe I have a tick. Maybe that's something that I'm okay with. Maybe it's something that I'm not okay with. And I'm being a little bit oversimplistic here, but if I have a certain behavior that I notice, the algorithm can show that to me and amplify it if I'm watching. So I think that if I find that there are some repetitions in my life, I can turn those over to the algorithm, and that gives me more power to create something new. And it frees me from an old repetitive past that, might really kind of imprison me. And now I'm more free to do what I really like to do, which is to find something original and new. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves about, how original and new are we? Is that something that's just kind of fun to say? Is it something that's, a good, attractive storyline? Does it look good on Facebook or LinkedIn? Or do we really commit to that? I mean, are you really willing? And this is part of the test of the true mystic in you. I've been there. I know what I'm made of. I've had 2 near-death experiences, and I know how to do a lot of exceptional things with my body and spirit in my life to connect with others and achieve what I'm here to do. But those things are, from many of these old masters, are potentially very valuable to you. But it really comes down to how far are you willing to go to access those aspects of yourself. In acting, I'll wind this up here. In acting, you'll hear some coaches that I respected, say, Mark, you got to make it more important. So it's kind of like, I was just going through the motions. I was just kind of skating the surface of a superficial pattern and presenting some material, and they wanted me to really feel deeper. And so, you learn some techniques, and you often end up using some parts of your own life to do some work in film. And that's where, when it really gets important, that's where you really get to the good stuff. And that's where at least for me, that's where I find satisfaction and originality in my creativity. And I'm interested in sharing that with others, but it is necessary to connect with others to do that. You can't do it isolated in a room like this. Hopefully, this message will reach some people and begin to build some momentum toward that in your life. And I look forward to having the possibility of seeing where this leads. All the best.